Hello, everyone. Let us start this webinar with Michela Magas. Thank you very much, Michela, for joining us today, digitally, but joining nonetheless in this virtual space. I'm going to do a brief introduction of who you are, and then you can start. The floor is all yours. So Michela is a designer who bridges the worlds of science and art, design and technology, academic research and industry with a track record of over 25 years of innovation. She is innovation advisor to the European Commission and the G7 leaders, member of president from the Leyen High-Level Roundtable for the New European Bauhaus, and member of the advisory board for CERN Idea Square. In 2017, she was the first woman from the creative industry to be awarded the European Woman Innovator. And in 2016, she was presented with an Innovation Luminary Award for Creative Innovation by the European Commission at the MTF Labs Europe. She created the concept of the Industry Commons, which have galvanized European industry around cross-domain data interoperability. She's the founder and CEO of the Stockholm-based MTF Labs, and she's going to be explaining what it is. A global community platform of around 8,000 creative innovators and scientific researchers, which provides a test case for innovation in areas as diverse as neuroscience, forestry, and microcomputing. For 20 years, she ran the Strong Matter Light Design Lab in London, creating design futures with global clients such as Apple, Nike, and Nokia. So thank you very much, Michela, for sharing with us today your experience and your fantastic work.
Thank you, Guillermina, and it's such a pleasure to be here. I actually would love to be there in person with the students. I do hope that this can also happen. But it's also lovely to see some familiar faces in the attendees, some people whom I've got to know very well. So I'm generally speaking so impressed with the sort of caliber that's coming out of Lucerne. Love to meet more people. But in any case, this is an opportunity now for us to kind of talk to each other. I'm going to throw huge amount of information on you now. So, and then for those of you who are in attending and who know me, they know how fast things work with me. It's just kind of a torrent of stuff. And then of course, you may need time to digest, but hopefully a few questions will pop up and a few things that are perhaps meaningful to you. And then by all means, I would love for you to react. So I'm not going to take a whole hour in my with my slides. I will try and leave time for you to fire some questions at me.
Yeah.
So I will just launch my second screen now, which is here, and let me know if you can see the slides. Fine.
Yes.
Great. So feeding policy directly from grassroots creative experimentation. This is kind of an unusual situation, something that designers don't normally do. And it has something that has sort of led to a very important positioning by the European Commission's President von der Leyen 2 years ago. She did something unprecedented, and she said, well, we will set up this new initiative called New European Bauhaus, a co-creation space where architects, artists, students, engineers, designers work together. So a cross-disciplinary space that has really culture creative sector or designers, architects, and creative people at the heart. And this really did not happen in policy before. It was a very bold move. And it was the very first time we were able to really connect directly to grassroots communities, to designers, to projects that are initiated on the ground. And lots of people were really kind of questioning whether this is possible and whether this is just some sort of temporary measure. It turned out into a real success story. But how did we even get to the point where we could have an initiative like this in Europe, where it required a lot of evidence to be actually presented to decision makers? So what's interesting is that a few years back, as Guillermina has mentioned, we've been running MTF Labs now with a community that has basically our contributors have now gone over 8,000 globally. And back in 2016, when the community went to over 5,000, we were picked up by an edition of Wired magazine, and this was guest edited by Barack Obama at the time. This was his last month of presidency, and he was asked to indicate what are the new frontiers for him. And we got picked up as one of the communities, led in this case by Victoria Modesta, whom you see in the picture there. And this was a real wake-up moment for us, because it was, okay, what is actually going on? What have we done to deserve this kind of exposure? And the reason that I put Victoria at the center of our labs that year and our big event, which was actually a really big one, and we took over the Funkhaus in Berlin, and there were hundreds and hundreds of people there. So I wanted a role model, someone who was really, really confident in the sense that she was able to challenge our preconceptions about ability, about interaction with technology, about how we express ourselves. Also extremely intelligent, and someone who's became fellow of MIT. Also closed the Paralympics in London, and a real very, very strong personality. And it had to be female as well. I really wanted to bust the idea that there's a certain typology that's in charge of technological prototyping, which is what we were doing. And so what we decided to do was to say, okay, how can we actually think of people as extraordinary in every possible way? How can we allow people to express themselves in ways that other people can't? Or how can we create role models that everybody can aspire to? And in this case with Victoria, the idea was to fit her with all kinds of sensors in our labs, and in this case, you will see on the right, Anouk Wipprecht, who's a great fashion tech designer, is famous for the robot dress, which you can look her up. She designed this prosthetic leg for Victoria that, instead of trying to make it look so-called normal, and we don't actually accept that term, as nobody for us is normal. Everybody can and truly can be extraordinary, but nobody is sort of normal. We all have our strengths and weaknesses, let's say. Instead of making it normal, it was actually activated by sensors in this carbon fiber bodice, and it was creating smoke for the stage as part of her mode of expression. And what's wonderful about it is that it inadvertently created this new spin on the sort of Marilyn Monroe image when her white dress is lifted by smoke. And this time the smoke is creating the dress, let's say. And then fitted her with neurofeedback sensors. So she started to train to control the projection mapping and lighting environment around her as another mode of expression during her performance. And we thought this would be really difficult, but actually by the end of the week, she was able to do it seamlessly. So what was really interesting about it is, like, we have here students from MIT that at a time Joy Ito sent over, and this is still from the documentary that MIT made about us and about this whole process. And you see how many women are part of this. So just putting it to the fore, some really, really unbelievable, amazing, capable women. And, there were lots and lots of guys in the room as well. But basically, we were actually making a real statement about this and about the sort of approach that perhaps a female perspective can bring to technology. But we thought we'd take this further. So the next thing we did was we went to Slush in Helsinki, where I had introduced a new track for music. And Slush being the biggest convention of startups and investors in Europe. 20,000 people go there. Pre-corona, of course. And there in our lab that was opening Slush proper with a challenge to Slush. Slush relies on a 3-minute pitch, which is a standard sort of approach to startups. We decided to challenge it with 20-minute performance. Now we'll come back to this idea of performance as being absolutely pivotal to how we understand our interaction with others and with the environment. But in this case, we put Rika Hanninen, blind singer, very proud to be a blind singer and vocal coach from the Sibelius Academy, at the center. And the first thing we asked her was something really simple. What is it that you need when you perform? What would you like to have? And in fact, this was a question asked by Human Instruments of Hakan Matossian, who's been with us for many years as a contributor, absolutely brilliant guy. And she said, well, one thing I can't do is I don't know how the audience feels when I perform because I can't see them. And so sometimes you can take something very simple, like a bunch of sensors, and ask audience to volunteer to get fitted with pulse sensors and say, okay, let's communicate their heartbeat to the singer and let's establish a communication. As simple as that, because this is not expensive, it's not complicated, it's not scientific breakthrough technology, but it's absolute game changer for the environment, for this kind of interaction. And what happened was that we thought that maybe just it would be really difficult to get all these investors and all these startups to react. But actually, we had a rock and roll moment. Everybody wanted to be on stage. Everybody wanted to be part of this experience. So it can be a game changer sometimes when you do actually think of something from a different perspective, something that's fairly quite simple. Then, of course, what we wanted to do was to take this idea of neurofeedback and brain training further. And the neurofeedback guides adapted a system for clinical trials, because this is very much an interdisciplinary space. So everybody on the stage was from all kinds of different backgrounds, including data science and neurofeedback and design and gaming and all kinds. And so the neurofeedback guys basically took this system for clinical trials that allows people with anxiety attacks to recognize when their brain pattern changes, and they can start to train to control it. And instead fitted it to be able to go up and down a musical scale. And so you could start to use your brain to sort of try and train your brain to go up and down the musical scale directly without using, hands-free, basically. And for most people in the lab, it was taking about 2 hours to be able to do that. And then Rika put the neurofeedback sensor on, and she was able to do it instantly. She was playing music directly from her brain. And here, this is what you're seeing is in the background is the national news that reported on this. Now, it occurred to us at that moment that someone who was previously in the era of mechanics and levers and buttons and interfaces that were incredibly user unfriendly to someone like Rika, was then with those affordances defined as less able-bodied, was now with the systems that we were designing far more talented than the rest of us. And therefore the whole idea of what is ability flipped in our heads. And this is something that I find incredibly important to communicate to decision makers, because it affects not only how we design systems and how we interact with our environment, which is either totally enabling and creating people, allowing people to be extraordinary, or totally disabling and totally discriminating. So where did that come from? Well, as Yemina has mentioned, my background is design futures, Apple, Nike, Nokia type of things. I got involved with iTunes at a very early stage. I got involved with my co-founder here, Instrumentalite, is still with Apple. I got involved with the University of London on a new system for searching for music. I was working at that time with Peter Gabriel's Digital Ventures. He's, for those of you who are perhaps too young to be aware of Peter Gabriel, do you look him up? Absolute genius in music and in innovation, amazing artist. And I was always diving deep into systems. So my graduation project from Royal College of Art was a new system for designing newspapers at the time when my country was at war. So it wasn't a trivial matter. complete rethink of how we present news and how we then affect decision makers who read those news. And then here I was diving into big data before people were really kind of into big data, as in what we call it now. And this is music in particular. And I'm going to show you just a few seconds of what this interface did, which is something I started writing in 2007. And in 2012, it featured at the London Olympics together with McLaren and British Aerospace, because for the first time, people realized you can connect big data and culture in a very, very obvious way. So the last thing you heard was a dialogue between China and Ireland, and it's based on the smallest cultural units of music, and then they track and trace each other. So I was working with various collections, and in this case, it was Peter Gabriel's world music collection. And this got me headhunted by the European Commission, weirdly enough, because there was this award going for Art Meets Science, and they were astonished that someone could actually use the results of research in terms of data and actually turn it into something that's intelligible and meaningful in terms of connecting cultures. And to cut long story short, so that's how I ended up at the European Commission. I mean, there's of course a bit of a longer story there because I've had 30 years of work behind me, but it resulted in me leading a roadmap for the future of this field. And I decided to assemble everybody in a space of common understanding. This has been a feature throughout my career, really. And in this case, we are the London Symphony Orchestra with the Brainwave Quartet, combining science and arts in a very, very clear and transparent and sort of obvious way. I do want to show you what were the early experiments that resulted from this union of all the disciplines and actually tangibly bringing them into an actual space, creating this equitable space, and then getting them to translate their thought into practice the way that we do in design prototyping.
Can't forget about the production cost. Can't forget about the production cost. Can't forget.
The boys called me the Towering Inferno, but perhaps because the headmaster was also a pipe smoker.
So that's just a few examples of let's say from 2012 to 2015, 16, something like that. And this, how do you go from that to actual policy? So what was at the foundation, and what we were able to do there was, crossing cultures. This is us in New Zealand. And the guy on the right is a hip hop artist, actually. This is us in Berlin in 2016, when we had the worst crisis of immigration, one of the worst crises of immigration, pre-Ukraine, of course, in Europe in 2016. And we actually managed to get a visa for Ahmad Bakri on the right from the Palestine to be able to collaborate with Rani Dar from Israel, who's on the left here, using ancient and modern instruments. And then crossing species. This is Robertina Shevjanic's work from 2015. This is a huge tank of jellyfish that communicate with chemical reaction. And then the artist translates that into signal and then plays the signal back, and basically it results in a performance across species. And then challenging this idea of Industry 4.0 on automation with sort of, let's say, humanizing this space. This is really, really important, because this whole time that I was asked by the European Commission to direct certain initiatives, I was also put on advisory for industry, and all of this stuff was being fed together with industry colleagues from Siemens, Intel, Orange, etc., into recommendations. And then challenging formats. If you haven't heard this, or if you haven't seen this, this is a duo called Dada Bots. They've been with us for years. Absolutely amazing guys with neural network, working with AI and neural networks, and reinventing the format for music to an endless doppelganger. Basically, neural net generates the music indefinitely. So if you actually Google them or you go to YouTube and put Dada Bots, you should listen to some of the stuff. It's being created live. It's an ongoing track. It's of course questioning the idea that our formats are still determined by systems that were in place maybe 70 years ago. So when you had the 7-inch vinyl, that was a handy format that could fit between radio transmissions, and also it was very handy to be sold as a product. And the Motown developed that into an art form. But of course, we are now working on completely different systems. So this is responding to completely new affordances. And then, of course, a wise performance centerpiece at this. I mean, I will just let you give you a tiny clip of a girl on the stage of the London Symphony Orchestra as to why is it important for everybody who's part of this process, who's creating, to actually express themselves with the tools that they've just created. So it's like completely transgenerational. I mean, this is our youngest, I think, DJ in Stockholm, and 3 to 83. So in this sense, transgenerational knowledge is massively important. And then in Stockholm, after we had a huge amount of different types of contributors from New Zealand to Alaska, I decided that I really wanted to put women in charge of all technology areas in a multi-gender, multi-generational, multidisciplinary environment. I mean, really do it, because this was at the time when people were like going, oh, we should have more women panelists on conferences, and we should have more women participating in keynotes and what have you. We were already at this point beating everybody to, I mean, it wasn't a competition. It was just the fact that we had created a space that actually provided value for women in technology. And so it was also the case of shaping the thought about what someone can be, as not as just defined by their profession, but something that is a continuously evolving space. A person can be very many things, as we well know, and they actually contribute to the value that they bring. So for instance, Imogen Heap here as blockchain activist, or Danica Kragic on the right here, famous professor of AI and robotics, as a fashion designer, or BBC Clicks presenter LJ Riches as a hacker and synesthete. And then, of course, I would never leave out certain professions such as policymakers. This is member of European Parliament, Eva Kaili, who agreed to be our woman in the lead of politics. And I think this is hugely important to have not just representation, it's not just mere representation, having strong female leadership in these positions is absolutely vital. And I think we have seen more recently with our leadership at the European Commission. So as a result of this, we asked people to declare themselves from 4 gender, let's say, categories. Don't really like the idea of categories, but we kind of stuck with radio buttons in most of the sort of forms that people have to fill in, because it's another system that we really kind of question. But 53% declared themselves as women, and the rest were men, binary, and prefer not to say. And this out of 800 plus participants in technology prototyping. And so the inclusion is absolutely foundational. These are some of our participants from being stuck in a nuclear reactor 25 meters underground for an entire week and collaborating together from all kinds of perspectives. And then this idea that this is some of the articles have been written about us by the Guardian newspaper in London. And this is Lauren Sadu, who for a very, very long time was unable to, he was a jazz trumpeter and was unable to play after a horrific accident for about 10 years and unable to express himself with the level of subtlety that he used to. So he would be given systems that were really crude. And here, for the first time, he said, "I actually feel I can play." This is major league, and some of our participants or attendees today have met this guy and worked with this guy, because Tim Palm, aka DJ Arthro, joined us in Stockholm and then won awards, incubation, and then international sound award at the Reeperbahn Festival as well, together with his team of 2 wonderful other participants in MTF, for this new system for accessible creation of running of menus and systems, which enabled him to express himself in entirely new ways and compose completely new types of music, rather than just using his nose and tongue as he normally does, and then basically be able to found his own production company. And his music featured 2 days after it was featured for the first time in our festival. It was featured on the BBC worldwide. So music is the social glue that is pulling all these people together. But there were so many other enabling mechanisms. And the reason was that in 2014, so only 2 years after I first founded it, and I was this kind of monster that was taking me forward. I mean, I had to leave everything else I was doing in life and just completely devote myself to this community. It was just exploding. Is that a bunch of academics, really, really reputable, amazing people, witnessed our 3 days of activity in at the heart of MIT, Microsoft Research Nerd Labs, together with Harvard and all of the students there, and basically said that what we were doing was absolutely pivotal for the all of the disciplines, all of the knowledge coming together. And so as a result of this, this was they created a manifesto for us. They initiated it, they created it. We took it directly to the European Commission. They were astonished. I felt a huge duty to create more enablers for this system to thrive and to really show that this is possible, that this is really what we are doing. So a series of enablers here, I will not go into detail. So I started to create systems that basically one of the end results was demonstrating to industry that we can speed up the process of innovation to very, very fast for all kinds of reasons, because of the series of enablers we've put into place. And then so what happens as people, to people who are involved in this process is you'll get MIT innovators under 35 and Forbes 30 under 30 and big fundings and patents and what have you. So demonstrating all this to industry. So industry jumps on board from all kinds of backgrounds. So first creative sector and then tech sector, and then all sorts of other things, including primary industry and semiconductor and you name it. And of course, this idea that you have to have enablers for the people who are in there, they have to be written into the system. They are very much part of the system. This is why, I'm talking actually about systems here, but I'm showing people. That's because they're pivotal to as agents in the system. And in this case, tracking and tracing of intellectual property in real time as it is being created, something that's really, really important in a co-creation environment. And then scaling this for industry into tech transfer toolkits, into systems for assembling different types of intellectual property, into early adopter kind of market adoptions and identifying gaps and all sorts of other things like that. So a little bit of the context here. What we were witnessing with our labs is that these domains of industry were actually breaking down because they're all assembling in our space around the same set of objectives and same set of essential enabling tools. So we felt that the verticals were slightly disintegrating. And of course, there was a danger of the whole thing turning into a giant soup. Now, the verticals disintegrating is not entirely a good thing. In part, it's a good thing. The leakages are actually very useful. I will explain that. But you do want to maintain domain knowledge because it's useful. You want to have the variety. You want to have the richness of individual domains. So what happens when you do have the leakages? Each domain has a culture and the cultures start to intersect. And from design and from the arts that wherever cultures intersect, there are opportunities. There are new forms of expression. There are new things that emanate from those places. So when you have this set of verticals and suddenly these cultures that are permeating, you start to detect new values. So new values will inevitably cause new behaviors, and new behaviors will create new kinds of, well, if we talk in economic terms, people like to think of these as emerging markets. But of course, emerging cultural and behavioral directions, which can change paradigms for society as well. So they don't have to be monetary. They don't have to be commercialized. They can also be game-changing in the sense of how we perceive our relationship, for instance, to nature. And then I created a art of building all of these enablers and systems. And again, I'm bridging this because there's a lot of material here for everybody to absorb. Created something called the Industry Commons, which is where we assemble all of these verticals, all of these domains from industry and from knowledge into a space, a common space, because we are now creating a new system, a new railway tracks based on which everything will operate. And of course, it's data-driven. That's why we're doing, because our affordances have changed. And the data-driven systems are ubiquitous. So what do we need first? We need a space of common understanding. This is why I say that space of common understanding is an absolutely central theme for all of my work. So in this this space of common understanding in terms of data across different domains, knowledge and industrial, is interoperability. So semantic interoperability. Semantic interoperability is basically, do we understand each other? Let's put it in plain language. And we have the first step that we did at European level, because Industry Commons was noted by the European Commission. I proposed it to them, I presented it. It was adopted first by some stakeholders and some doubted it. And now it's actually really actually recognized as, and it was created as a complete funding track as well. And the first step that was taken was, let's create an ontology ecosystem. And ontologies are what allows us, they are basically systems that allow us to manage relationships between meanings. And as you probably are aware, in different domains of knowledge or different industries, the relationships between meanings do tend to vary, and they depend very much on the context in which that domain operates. So we need to align them. If I say product for designers, this will be very clear that a product for a jeweler is a piece of jewelry, a product for a interaction designer is perhaps a piece of software. So we are talking about completely different meanings based on the same piece of semantics. And so this is the main layer, but it doesn't exist in isolation. It's very, very important. And it is really interesting just how much it's thought of in isolation in the decision-making circles. And I don't mean those at the very top, but those who tend to, for instance, design the digital agenda. We have those kinds of tools. These are the, the tools, these are the experts in, computer science who can help us to unravel this. And it's basically floating data layer on the top that can cause a huge amount of social harm if it's divorced from our value systems. So what do we need? We need systems of agreements where we actually establish, where we make sure that some of the spaces are regulated. Regulation is supposed to be an enabler, not policing. It's an enabler. Peer-to-peer contracts, but also this is where we register our intellectual property and track and trace everybody's contribution so everybody can get a slice of the pie. We need systems of resilience where we actually don't overshoot our limits. If you are aware, if you're familiar with Kate Raworth's donut economy model, there is an economy that can function extremely well, but not by overshooting on our resources. Systems of responsibility. This is where we embed corporate social responsibility or ethics or responsible AI. And then at the foundational level, there are our systems of beliefs, our societal values. And this is where we embed inclusion. And then on top of all this, if we have got all of these layers, when we have this system that's hyper-connected, trackable and traceable, any of the breakthrough innovation that sparks up at the top, on top of all of this, is guided by the right kind of principles. And it is fully trackable, traceable inside a value system rather than some startup sitting in a corner trying to fund themselves and trying to connect to business. So let's wind back a little bit to the real stories on the ground, because we can be up at high level thinking about these kind of why do we make decisions and what based on what. But then we go to, this is our labs last year in Aveiro, and these ecosystemic approaches that I have just illustrated in my my systems of systems, let's say, earlier. The ecosystemic approaches are very much applied also on the ground. So this is Anya Yermakova in one of the several projects. There were 13 projects just on the ground resulted from last year's 1 week of labs. And I want to lead you through our thinking of systems in respect of ecosystems on the ground. So this is one of our systems. It's the most used system in the world, the Google Maps. And we are looking at a square of blue, and this square of blue is just simply representing the ocean. And it really doesn't seem to have a great deal of value represented here. And if we were to follow some of our old colonialists, we could dissect this into nice square lots, and we could apportion it and sell it off as some kind of property, because now you can do that with GPS. Our ancestors did that when they started to measure land and said, oh, we can measure land. We can now attach a piece of paper to the land and say, you own it. We could do the same with the ocean. We would do a great deal of harm with that, but we can do, because our system is not designed for us to value it in any other way. Now, if I look at the same square of blue through a satellite image, I actually realize there are dwellings, there are people, there are species, there are cohabiting very harmoniously in this very same patch, but we haven't assigned any indicators to this for people to recognize it as value. What we're actually looking at is the Ria de Aveiro. It's one of the protected wetlands in Europe, one of the most beautiful, most biodiverse areas in Europe. And it is the Aveiro Lagoon, here again from Google Maps being pretty blank. And as it so happens, communities jump on open street maps that allow them, give them the tools to draw themselves in, so they draw themselves in. And then you can see, for instance, that same scene here from the open street map, that actually these are neighborhoods, and they're neighborhoods that seamlessly, if you're in Aveiro, you will see that they seamlessly extend the city. So you're actually walking from one neighborhood to the one that's floating on top of the water without noticing. And they float on top of the water because they're driven by salt pans. And this is an activity that has been there for 10 centuries. So I will let you see just a minute of the intro of our documentary that was made about the communities on the ground that we were interacting with, that has now, I mean, you will see a few awards, but actually it's now got so many that we've kind of, well, you'll see it on Vimeo. It's completely littered with official selections and what have you by Cannes and San Francisco and Berlin and everything. There you go. Just a first intro, just so that you get a picture.
Aveiro is a city right on Europe's last coastal marshland. It's the largest and most incredibly biodiverse wetland in Europe, and in 1687, the same engineers that built the dams to keep water out of Amsterdam came to Aveiro to bring the water in. I'm Andrew Dubber. I'm director of MTF Labs, a global community of brilliant artists and scientists who come together to address societal challenges through creative experimentation. Now, we've run 20 events worldwide, the last couple of which were in Aveiro, and it really seems to fit there. Now remember, this is a city that's been completely engulfed by the ocean twice. It's right at the front line of climate change. So what does that mean for a culture, for heritage, arts, innovation? I wanted to really understand this place and its people, the real people of Aveiro.
So you can watch the rest on Vimeo, but the people on the ground really matter. The real environments, really immerse ourselves in situ in these places. And so, of first big paradigm thing that's leading it forward is more than human ecosystem. This more than human ecosystems has been introduced by us at top level with the new European Bauhaus initiative. Us and our colleagues who are on high-level roundtable, including Olafur Eliasson, whose team was really going on about this from the beginning. And I want you to have a very, very quick glimpse of how this looks when you're immersed at that level, but also to think about the fact that this has now also influenced big industry to think ecosystemically, which is quite extraordinary.
And so we have actually sort of very unique ecosystems here, and they're part of this greater salt marsh system, which actually is, you know, biodiversity-wise very important. There are well over 1,000 species recorded just in this lagoon here.
Artistically, it really inspires us to think of that there are organisms that adapted to these kind of environments.
So how can we engage and see these areas in a new light? What kind of layers can we add to this? You know, sound, visual, etc., that help sort of somehow bring forth the actual importance of these air regions and areas, because they really are important.
So inadvertently, I apparently posed a challenge in one of the sessions the first day, when I asked if people here could make me feel the sound of the ocean.
So here's ocean as an instrument, and this is us focusing on where we converge, us with the ocean, us with each other, us with, you know, maximally inclusive. So this idea of radical inclusion, where we ask this question first, where do we converge, rather than sort of going tick boxing and sort of trying to include categories of things. And then you know, it's about cross-domain, but never canceling each other out. This is hugely important. This is a really amazing oceanographer, a lady that spent all of her life doing some absolute breakthroughs in oceanography, and her beaming into the labs as one of the inspirational talks. And combining indigenous and digital technology. So this is Anya here with a multidisciplinary team from so many different countries. I have to try and count them. And of course, all our global satellites that participated in just one of these projects, where they actually looked at the full life cycle of material, from buying a fish to skinning it. This is like on a Wednesday, you know, early morning fish market, to Saturday fish leathers, complete costumes, masks, sensor driven, all kinds of other layers, and poetry written about it, all kinds of things, various different contributions that end up in a piece that's multidisciplinary, multifaceted. And then following, of course, the full life cycle of a material, which is something that's absolutely essential for our industries now. And this is why we are creating this system, so we can track and trace provenance, and then creating strategies for how we think about things that are data-driven, to be judicious. This is why we called it Just Ocean: judicious, unbiased, safe, and transparent. So thinking about provenance, thinking about the fact that every data set is biased. We have bias embedded in our systems. And then ensuring a beyond European perspective, having this global brainstorming sessions. These are our colleagues from IIT in Chicago, and having 26 countries, 50 people from 3 countries, and then a further several countries as satellites, in this sort of global but also local, you know, each region according to its needs. This is a really big deal. This is why we connect with the people on the ground, with the real ecosystems, and then create strategies. For instance, I will now jump straight to what happens in policy when I translate that. So here's me working with the European Committee of the Regions on a new systemic approach to how we use European funds. We're talking millions and millions here. We're talking about a spark that starts with this approach of working on the ground, creating new kinds of ideas, expressions that can be social, cultural, technological, economic, and then picking them up with other mechanisms that all exist, but they have never spoken to each other. They're never really united. And when I suggested we should do that, they all jumped at it and basically said they needed someone like myself from the outside to actually be able to suggest it. And then translating that to high-level policy. This is us during Corona, consulting with the president. And then there's this being vocal on the stage during the European Bauhaus Festival that some of the attendees have been very familiar with. And on my right is Gerfried Stoker from Ars Electronica. On my left is, sorry, on the other way around. On the right in the screen is Gerfried. And on the left is Eddie Hartog, who's in charge of smart cities and communities at the Directorate General for Communication Information Technology. So, you know, here we are combining the experts from very different perspectives on the stage and actually having a voice in terms of the shaping policies. And then I get, you know, hugely privileged to be able to work with these kinds of people. And you might recognize Bjarke Ingels here, for example. Olafur wasn't there. We now have Francis Kere, the latest Pritzker Prize winner. We actually onboarded 3 people who were born in the African continent, and we massively proud to have this beyond European perspective. And on that note, I am super privileged to be working with some of these women in leadership positions, such as Sheila Patel on the left, who has done amazing work globally, but particularly in India with poor women's collectives. And on the right, our commissioner for cohesion in Europe, Elisa Ferreira. But then you might recognize some people on this picture. And this is us in Brussels. This is just behind that that stage that I just showed you. That's us working with the team, all these wonderful, wonderful women also. And one clown. He's a real artist clown. On there, he was teaching people how to be a clown. And a great team of people working on our Open Minds project, which is all about creating curricula for accessibility. So here is some of the here's the work that has actually been created by some of the attendees with us, and completely reframing how we perceive the idea of accessibility or ability. Because it is, after all, about these, about the minds, and the way that we open our minds is, for example, here in our nuclear reactor, 25 meters underground in Stockholm, sending our voices to the moon, literally, through the Dwingeloo radio telescope in the north of the Netherlands, and it bounces off the moon and it turns back into your ear after 2.4 seconds. Now, it's not a scientific breakthrough, but there's 83 people who go through this experience, and it completely changes our mental space, and in terms of what missions we can go for. And so, you know, we can actually tangibly say, or we can say with evidence, that we don't predict the future, we invent it. So I will leave it there, and I hope we have like a few minutes left for people to be able to ask some questions.
Thank you very much, Michela. I have a question.
Sure.
I love that metaphor of the common space for understanding. So that is one of your strengths. You create common space for understanding. What are the challenges in creating that common space that you have faced?
So there is something that's very familiar to culture creative sector, in fact, is a massive challenge, and that is the economy of scarcity. Mm-hmm. So when you are in a really underfunded, perhaps, or under-recognized environment, and design is often misinterpreted, particularly in Europe, actually. In the States, it's valued a great deal more than in Europe. In fact, in Korea and in Singapore, where I was last week, is valued a great deal more. So that's a real issue that we have with when you undervalue something and there's fewer funds available, it creates a competitive atmosphere because people are scrambling for breadcrumbs quite a lot of the time. And the economy of scarcity is also a mental attitude. You know, some systems have it embedded, like the UK system of taxation is based on that. Mm-hmm. Whereas, you know, I compare it to the Swedish system where I've moved partly due to Brexit, whereas the economy of plenty, where you have to, you are encouraged to create more and more value all the time. Now, there is a different mental attitude. So when you have an economy of scarcity, this is why we work so hard in Europe to actually get our sector recognized for the value that it creates, to create spaces that demonstrably generate value, that can have value attached to them, that hopefully remove this need for competition and divert it to co-creation instead, and greater value creation. So this is a really big deal and a big challenge.
Nice, thank you very much. I wonder if Vanessa and Deborah have questions. You can write.
Yeah, I can see some in the. So Debbie and Vanessa have jumped on straight away.
Okay.
And why did I choose music? The music sector was nosediving as of 1999, and that is because of Napster. So you can look that up if you weren't too kind of focused at that time, or too young to even kind of notice, possibly. And what happened was that overnight the whole industry went from selling CDs and living from sort of tangible things to actually, or radio transmissions, but went straight into the digital download model. And all of a sudden, the entire industry had to digitize. And this was a massive challenge. So their business models that I had before completely disappeared. Of course, I have a passion for music. That's another, and I find it really chimes with me, chimes with many people, because it's one of those, you could say universal forms of expression. Mm-hmm. So I can enter another culture through its music, and then through its food as well. which Vanessa will know very well about. So there are music and food that take you other places. They're very portable.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a wonderful thing to use as a space of common understanding. But also, as I say, technically and business-wise, it was in a dire place. So it needed reinventing. So it combined the space of common understanding and innovation that was desperately needed for the sector. So that's why music. I see that Debbie is also saying something about system design. So you're wondering what practices and tips can give you in order to improve and train skill sets to think outside the box and improve our innovative thinking. That's in terms of trying to break with what already exists. Well, you start by looking at what are our affordances. So there's a typical situation that a typical example I can give you is, on one hand, when someone invented cinema, the first thing they did was film a play. They didn't understand you could cut the piece of tape and make jump cuts and actually design the narrative in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I could argue that very similar thing has happened with internet and with our information systems, that we just kind of had paradigms like filing cabinets and windows and very static things that are nothing to do with the dynamic tool that it actually is. So think about, what are the affordances? Do we need to apply the old paradigm, or can we start to experiment with what are the new affordances of this? Because you don't really know until you try them. This is why we do testing. This is why we do experimentation. The other metaphor example I can use is that before someone invented the piano, there was no such thing as a pianist virtuoso. So you don't know what you're capable with the new system. And so this is also why you need to test it. This is why we would never have known that Rika had an incredible talent for brain-computer interfaces with systems, far better than us, unless we had tried it, unless someone had had the imagination to set it up in the first place, or say something crazy like, we're going to convert the system that's for anxiety attacks into a musical instrument. And people will look at you and go, are you crazy? You know, because actually there is sense behind that. So you need to think about what is possible, what are our affordances, and then test them, experiment, and you'll be surprised.
Great.
Vanessa says, once you said the only way to make great things happen is when we are all at eye level, referring to the importance of collaboration and interdisciplinarity. It's not the reality in majority of jobs. Yeah, this is why we start to create systems that have incentives for everyone. And I must emphasize that the incentives are very different for different types of people. So for instance, where you have this system that goes across industries, industry typically will not release their intellectual property into a system. They will not give it to the innovators to play with because they don't see the return until, that is, you create a system that very clearly and demonstrably gives them a return. And all of a sudden they have to be part of it because someone else is going to take advantage of it if not. So once again, yeah, they will not play at the same level playing field if they don't have to, or if they don't have an incentive. But you have to really scan the whole space and actually realize, have you left anybody out? It's an ecosystem, you know, it adjusts itself. If it's a proper ecosystem, everybody has to be able to basically balance within it.
And
we don't think, sorry, carry on. Do you want to say something?
Go ahead.
No, I'm just reading from the
and
things,
that's
but please go ahead.
The economy of plenty that you were mentioning.
Yes.
So
yes, absolutely.
Economy of plenty.
Absolutely. So this is the thing, that disruptive innovation. So just to clarify, I tend to follow the Gary Pisano model that defines disruptive innovation as disrupting the business model, but using the same technology. Radical innovation as innovating with technology, but on the same business model. And then architectural innovation as doing both, because your architectural transformation is a fundamental transformation. So just to clarify, but disruptive innovation, which disrupts your business model, that usually happens somewhere in the sideline where you are, as a large organization, not seeing it, is only disruptive if it's outside of your value chain. If you unite people in one value chain and in this digital system, you are notified when someone is experimenting with your data set and creating third new use case possible, third layer of data that indicates a new market or a new innovation. You can make an informed decision whether you want to invest in it or not. Without marketing, I mean, you can do further marketing studies, but without kind of stabbing in the dark and trying to throw money at certain new possible directions. So it's a very, very good incentive. So yeah, it's the economy of plenty, because it's where is their value? Where can I spot it? How can I make a best decision about it?
Yeah. I think that we have more questions, right?
Yeah. So we don't predict the future, we invent it. Why is it so important? And how can we, as these future design managers, contribute to this objective? Well, I see very often people who are divorced from the ground. They try to concoct a sort of a scenario in their heads, and each one of them will have a different scenario. When you mention a certain sort of initiative or direction, everybody imagines a different thing in their heads. This is why it's difficult to reach consensus, and this is why if you're connected to the ground, you set it up on the ground, you test it. The sort of evidence that it creates for policymakers is unquestionable. What happened to Rike was unquestionable. It was demonstrable. It was in front of you. It's in front of you. Nobody's going to say to me, oh, that sounds far-fetched. No, we did it. It's there. That is the future. Now, we need to pay attention to it and actually start to create strategies for how we define ability in the future, how we create systems that are equitable, how do we include everybody in this process. So evidence, real evidence on the ground. That's how you don't predict the future, you invent it. Women's leadership is vital, absolutely. So I will tell you some simple things, especially in Switzerland, where male workforce, yes, it's at the top of the pyramid. You're absolutely right. There are some dire examples. In Lucerne, of course, in your school, not at all, because I can see all the people who are really, really sharing in terms of responsibilities and leadership, and also producing some amazing future female leaders. So all credit goes to you. When it comes to the general sort of habit of a country to push the men to the top, and your neighbor Austria is even worse, because they have only 10% of women in business leadership positions, so it's very, very low. Quite shocking actually when you think of how many innovation awards they win, and it's actually quite interesting. So why a female perspective? I can again say from experience. So let's say that the gender is a sliding scale. So we're not actually positioning people into 2 factions, 3 factions or something. Well, let's say it's a sliding scale. And you have different kind of incentives and aptitudes in this. There is certainly a group on one end who are very geeky. And I can be as much of a geek as anyone, actually. Yes, I got into programming and I can be like that. And I may not look it, but I am. Which is, case in point. But then also there is a really, really big group that we found of particularly women, and not always women, but particularly women who are goal-oriented. So they will say, oh, I'm not very technical, I'm not really into computers, but I'd love to change the way that people behave or interact. Or there is this idea I had when I had my kid, that there's something that should exist that doesn't exist. Okay, let's just say this kind of idea, goals or missions. And they, given the opportunity and the right set of wonderful people to collaborate with who know various different types of things, they will get there no matter how. They will slalom through the whole thing, learn everything they need to do. And by the end of the process, very often they're like completely computer literate, and they've actually written some programs, and they've actually learned how to use electronics, and they've learned how to create a product. There are all kinds of things, just because they want to do this thing. So there is this one lot. Well, I'm just talking about 2 extreme maybe examples, but one lot that just play with gadgets. They love it, and they will discover something because they are just so into kind of fiddling with it until something really exciting happens. That's great. And then there's this other lot that are like, I want to go and solve this big world problem, and I'm just going to do whatever it takes and learn whatever it takes. And the upskilling is like, whoa, like straight through the roof. They've learned so far. I mean, actually, question for you, Debbie and Vanessa in particular. How much do you think you have learned just by being immersed in Brussels for a few days?
A crazy amount of things. It's even hard to put in words just by observing and listening.
Because you had to navigate that space, didn't you? I mean, you're put kind of outside of your comfort zone, really. And in that sense, but you know why you're there and you know what's important about it. And you can also make an informed judgment in terms of like, you know, who's cool, who's not. Is it boring or is it not? Or is it genuine? Or do these people mean what they say, etc.? I mean, you have to make all of those value judgments and then navigate the space and find, you know, how does it fit in respect of you, or what is your relationship to it? So when you're outside of your comfort zone, as most people are in our labs, and everybody is equally outside of their comfort zone, they need to navigate. And it can be quite hard sometimes, isn't it, Vanessa? Sometimes when you are placed with the challenge of how do you reinterpret ability, it is incredibly hard. You hit a wall at some point, don't you? When you go through that process, when you really challenge yourself. That was to you, Vanessa, in particular.
I don't know if she can speak. Can you? Oh.
Yes. If you can repeat the question, because I didn't get it. Sorry.
I was just saying that sometimes when you're outside of your comfort zone, so you're trying to, in your case, rethink how do you represent ability. Then you hit a wall sometimes. It's really hard.
Yes, totally. Yeah, it was very challenging, the whole internship, and frustrating in a good way.
Okay, but... so they had a frustrating internship. That is what we learned.
No, where I learned.
But you came out on the other side.
Yeah, totally. I think I learned a lot, and I'm super grateful for this. As I already told you, like, I'm super grateful for having this opportunity. I learned so much. I got to know amazing people, and yeah, it's just learning all about the dynamics of how this works, and networking, and also building confidence, because I think as a woman, it's usually not easy to go into these places where men have most of the power. So yes.
So anyway, I think you should be proud. Both of you should be, or rather, and Lynn is, I think, here as well. Lynn is also working there with us, even though she did an internship. She didn't have a frustrating internship then, Lynn, but she had a frustrating something else with us, because she got into web design with us, and she had to conquer a system in the process, which was not easy at all. So everyone goes through these challenges, really big challenges that they have to break through, and at some point you're like really banging your head against the wall. Everybody's in the same place. Like, if you are mission oriented or you want to accomplish something that's a bit different, then you are going to have to go through this moment of, why am I doing this? And then when you emerge then out on the other side, and this is what happens in the labs en masse, because 50 people who are, for instance, in the same room will actually emerge together. This idea of creating a space of common understanding is really reinforced, because at that point, when you have emerged out of an experience of that sort of magnitude, but you've pushed yourself to the limits and you've come out the other side, you really have a strong bond with everyone in the room. So we end up with this kind of long-term collaborations and people kind of carrying on and across disciplines, very disparate sort of types of backgrounds working together or achieving. Anyway, by no means is this over now. I think we have lots more work to do.
But I think that's a very important lesson, that hitting a wall can be part of learning. And sometimes
absolutely
perceptions about learning, that learning is something that goes like that, and learning is a process. that is constantly evolving, and confusion or being confused, that is a term that frequently appears in a classroom, or hitting the wall, or the process of struggle, is part of the process of learning, and will result in that emergence that you were talking about, that is the learning. So we all need to go through that. And actually it's a process of life. It's not just a process that happens in the classroom.
Absolutely. And it's also the design skills, as in the sort of knowledge creation method that you have at your disposal as designers gives you the ability to, when you hit the wall, just question it from various different perspectives. The way that you are, it's ingrained in you. That's what you need to do at that moment. And you will find where the exit is. Now, the thing is that that is a way to create knowledge that is not sufficiently recognized out there, because everybody thinks that this really nice linear rational method of deduction and induction in science is so logical and so clear that these people are very intelligent, very rational. The truth is that induction means usually 80% at best probability. That means you're already not inclusive because you're leaving 20% of something else out. There are lots of kind of issues with that. When it comes to the way that we think in design and in the arts, we are questioning subject matter from so many different perspectives. Sometimes it can get quite disorienting because it'd be so much information that's thrown at you. But the more you learn to use it and to navigate it and to actually extrapolate the value from it, so all the new knowledge that you are generating en route, the more you get confident to be able to go over these barriers that you encounter on a regular basis. And it is incredibly useful. This is what I say to policymakers with the new systems that we are creating, because we're using artificial intelligence that throws new surprising things. Scientists don't know what to make of it, what the results. We can create alternative methods of navigating through things with visualizations, which are really a very good skill that we have from our side that can help them. We can question the subject matter, as I say, from other perspectives other than those that they are used to help them unravel the subject matter. So we are an incredibly useful force in this huge transitions that we are going through.
Yeah. And also we are not afraid of exploring the what if, the affordances that you were saying, the what is possible, but let us try it, right? We really go into, can we try? Let us see what happens. And that's trying, I think that is key. Otherwise we just keep the ideas in our head, like we were talking at the beginning, right? You have a good idea, but it's in your head. Making it real is a different thing. And
absolutely,
by trying is how you start. So that's the first step. But if you never try,
absolutely, and this applies equally to cool ideas. Like when we say, I have a cool idea, and then you try it and it's actually rubbish. Or that can happen very, very often. And cliches. So sometimes we have in our sector sort of this idea of, we mustn't mention the word cliche, oh dear, and actually a cliche for one person can be a revelation for another, because this person can put a completely new spin on something that you think is a cliche. So actually it is a bit silly to dismiss it. You are dismissing opportunities if you dismiss it. So also people kind of go, don't keep saying the same things, it's so boring, It's like, well, actually, maybe one time that I say the same thing, there may be a new spin on that thing. Yeah. So you keep open to opportunities and don't dismiss, don't discriminate, don't think that other professions, for example, because you're looking at them from your perspective. So policy makers talking this kind of really weird language, well, get informed, understand what it is, and then make a value judgment based on full understanding and not just sort of face value. So we don't dismiss. We just we immerse ourselves into subject matter, bang against all of the walls, question as much as possible, open doors all the time.
Listening without judgment. Just take it.
Yeah.
Reconsider. See it from a different perspective and see what come up.
Because you can find value in places that you never thought of. This is where, you know, this is why it's worth breaking out of those silos, both kind of mental and physical.
So thank you very, very much. It has been wonderful. I'm aware of time. We are past the time. My apologies. It has been a very, very nice experience. Fantastic conversation. Thank you for sharing all the work that you are doing. I think that your approach is unique, and hopefully it's a great inspiration for all of our students. And
well, it's absolute pleasure. It's been an absolute pleasure to have your students on board, and hopefully more now. And I'm looking forward to their thesis, very different directions for thesis, I think, and some really interesting things come out of it. And particularly look forward to sort of building the next generation of leaders.
Yes.
Very, very important.
Yes.
So there is an anonymous question, sort of what advice would I give for working in policy? I think the sort of skills that you are acquiring here as part of Lucerne, and with all of these experiences, work experiences that you guys have been having, this is absolutely vital for policy making. I mean, this is where we need these kinds of approaches and these kinds of methodologies to be rolled into decision making. They are hugely valuable.
Thank you very much.